Hello, it's Maggie, the Cheshire Crafter here. Now these 3 Hawaiian shirts were purchased in a charity shop and they have something in common. They're going to go into a quilt for my brother who loves to travel. In part 1 of the video I showed you the basics of making flying geese one at a time. So this video will feature how to cut directional fabric for one at a time flying geese method. I'm going to begin with a shirt that has a vertical stripe, and I want it in the flying geese to look like a horizontal stripe to emulate the sea. This is the full length of the front, and I've ironed them. Paper, and all I've done with a piece of paper is just emulated a few stripes on it just to show you more or less what a striped piece of fabric would look like. And I'm going to cut the edge using my Fiskars rotary cutter and ruler. I'm going to cut a 6.5 inch wide strip with the stripe vertically, exactly as I did in part 1. And I'm going to cut my 3.5 inch strips exactly as I did in part 1. So I did it like the shirt was. The shirt was vertical and I ironed it horizontally, and then I cut it vertically for a straight line to get a straight edge, and then I cut it vertically again to get a 6.5 inch strip, and then as before I turned it on its side and then started to cut the 3.5 inch pieces that I needed. If you look at this fabric, we've got palm trees. Should we look at it from this angle? We've got palm trees going up and islands, and I want to preserve those. Now if I use the same principle and I use my piece of paper, if I cut a 6.5 inch strip this way and then started cutting 3.5 inch pieces off it, it would go into the machine this way, like I've just shown you, which seems right. Okay, so the islands are in the vertical stripe, but I want this as a flying geese, and the flying geese are going to be on their side. So that way is not going to work. This is why it's worth testing it on paper first. Start cutting from the bottom. So first of all, I'll cut a straight piece, cut the bottom of the shirt off, and then I'm going to cut 6.5 inch strips going up the shirt, as many I can get. I might only get 2 of those in this one, possibly 3 from the front, and I've got 2 fronts. This was quite a small shirt, so on this occasion I might need to use the back of the shirt as well. My decision is to use the back and one of the short sleeves. I need, once I straighten this back edge, I need a 6.5 inch. That's my ruler. Flip it over, and if I go part way up the shirt, it'll leave all this piece intact, and I need to make sure I've got sufficient to cut across. I work out of 17 inches I can get 5 3.5 inch pieces cut out, and from the sleeve I can get 2 pieces cut, so that'll give me the 12 that I need. If you're in any doubt, cut a piece the size that you need, and just make sure not only have you got the orientation right, but that you've got the size right. So I've ironed those, now let me cut them out. I need a straight edge. Let me do that. I place my ruler on the edge of the fabric. Sorry about my washing up in the sink. And I'm going to pull this back now. The piece that I've cut is now 6.5 inches wide, And I'm now going to decide where I can get the best use of the trees. One there and one there. I really want to make sure I capture this tree and the tree trunk and this island. So let me see what happens if I take it across a little bit. I'm going to get the best piece I can. So I'm going to cut here. It's the equivalent of fussy cutting. Now I've got a straight edge. I now need to go 3.5 inches in. So I line up the ruler with the edge of the fabric and cut. That's a great fussy cut piece of island, and it's in the right orientation too when I sew it. Let's do the same with this piece. Line it up on the edge and cut. So I've got a little bit of wastage, but from that sleeve I've got 2 good pieces with the correct orientation when it goes as a flying geese edge. So I'm cutting off the tail of the shirt. Don't worry, in doubt, get out your piece of paper. I'm certain that I want to cut this at 6.5 inches away from this straight edge. Line up my ruler against the edge and cut. I'm going to do the same for a 6.5 inch piece across here. Now that way I preserved this piece and a few extra pieces, and I've got lots for a different project. This ruler will cut 8 pieces of fabric at a time. I'm only going to cut 2. So I've lined up my 2 pieces of fabric with the cut edge together. And first of all, I'm going to cut a straight edge. I'm going to cut 3.5 inch pieces across, and I'm hoping to get 10 pieces out of these 2 strips. There's 2 already. I'm happy with that. I've got 12 really good pieces of fussy cut fabric with the correct orientation. You can tell that they look like trees, and there are some clouds, but there are islands as well. How's that for a fussy cut piece of fabric? On this one then, there's likely to be more wastage because I want to pick out certain features. Now there's the tree, there's a palm tree on a little bit of an island. There's a hotel and some trees. There's a hotel and trees in a different orientation this side. But there's also the sailing ship, and I've got 2 of those on this. This is the back, and I've also got 1 sleeve. Now from the sleeve, I want to try and preserve that palm tree and that hotel. Let me see if I can do it. Test it with my trusted piece of paper. Now it might, but I think I can get most of it in. And then flip the paper over and get most of that hotel in. Right, first let me cut from this, and then I'll tackle the back. Use the bottom here to give me the cut line, and I'm going to use one of my erasable ink pens. This just irons off, doesn't it? Sorry, and use that as my guide. I'm using my ruler to make sure I'm going straight, so I know that when I pull this down it will be at a 90-degree angle. Cut. Marvellous tool this. Right, let's do the same. 3.5 inches across and then 3.5 inches across again, and I'm going to cut. That's 3.5 inches wide. I need to cut it at 6.5 inches at the top. So 2 pieces, one on top of the other, and cut. I should have 2 perfect fussy cut rectangles in the right orientation. First, I'm going to cut not right the way across the bottom where I'm going to capture that sailing ship and some of the sea. And that's going to be my baseline. Now I know 6.5 inches here, when I leave a seam allowance, I'm going to lose some of the land, but I'll get most of that in. Will I capture that in again? I don't know. Right, there's two 6.5 inch rulers next to each other. The answer might be no, I might lose some of it, which is a shame. And I decided to preserve the tree and the hotels and the islands because I found the 2 sailing ships elsewhere. Right, let's look at this piece underneath. Now, as you can see, I didn't cut square, and I want that sailing ship very central. So I've put my piece of paper over it and marked it where I want to cut, so that that will sit pretty central on this piece of fabric, taking into account the seam allowances. So I'm going to cut here. That way I can cut 3.5 inches this way and 3.5 inches this way. Got 3 usable pieces, and because the shirt tails were going up, I'm going to keep those for another patchwork project. The same trick here, because I really want to preserve as much of that tree as I can, but it means that I'll get that hotel in, I'll get that hotel in, possibly that one and possibly that one. Let's see how far I get. So far I've got hotels, islands, palm tree, more islands and hotels and some sea, but I've only got 1 sailing ship. Now I want 3 sailing ships for this, and let me see where I can find them. Here on this shirt front, I'm definitely going to fussy cut them, just taking my ruler as a guide to see. I need 3.5 inches. I think I'm going to cut perhaps a 4-inch strip, marked with a pen where I want the cuts to be. You could just use a pair of scissors to cut this out rather than the cutting board. And likewise here. 3.5 inches from the edge. Oops, it's a bit of a stretch. There's my second mark. That doesn't look 6.5 inches, does it? I'm going to check that because I think I've got that wrong. This needs to be 6.5 inches, which is the full length. Yeah, that wasn't right, was it? The full length of that. Tick there. For this one, I've got the lower mark there. Line it up. Approximately there. And I have to turn it again, turn the fabric round and cut there. So let's see what we've now got. Happy with that. I've got a variety of trees, islands and hotels and sailing boats. Right, last shirt now. On my third fabric, I might get it all out of this one back. So I'm going to start by cutting across the bottom and then 6.5 inches up, and I'm sure I'll get all 12 pieces that I need out of this one back. It's easier if I fold this fabric in half and cut 2 layers at a time. That was easier than I expected, so I did 12 straightforward cuts, and I've got a variety of blues, pinks and the man on with the surfboard. So that's my 12 pieces, fabric all cut, and I've got loads of Hawaiian shirts left for future projects. If you sew the flying geese together like I showed you in part 1, they will look like this, but when you turn them on their side as a flying geese, they will become horizontal. Here are my flying geese, but let's take a look at what they look like in the right orientation. And then I'll show you the pattern of the quilt, and you'll need to come back for part 3 for me putting the quilt together. I hope that helps. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and come back to see me completing this quilt, won't you? Bye.